Facebook. We're on Facebook.
We're on the Book of Face.
So we need you there because Ryan Ginn, on my right, is going to be looking for those questions from you guys. Jeremy Birmingham, on my left, is going to be providing the answers, and I'm going to do my best to stay out everybody's way.
I love answering stuff. I feel like the great. Who's that Johnny Carson character?
Karnak?
Yeah, that guy. That's me today.
I bet that's the first time that might have been said on a Facebook Live.
I hope so.
We are at Pigskin Brew Company in Creekside and Gahanna. As usual, it's our Monday Facebook Live show, Land of 10 Ohio State. We got some people in here. I don't know that they specifically came to hang out with us.
I don't think they did.
But it is a holiday. It's a fantastic day to come out. Happy hour, of course, we're here. It's going on. We've got a new Hatch Chili Brown Ale that's on. I don't know how I know this, but it's pretty spicy. It probably wasn't the best choice.
Market research confirms that it's a little spicier brew than perhaps our fateful host was pondering when he sat down prior to this.
Talking for 30 minutes after having a pepper beer gets a little challenging. I'm not saying that I definitely did that, but I just think probably in the future I would reconsider if it was even an option.
Perhaps go with like a cream ale, like a more veteran/wise person may have done.
Or in a couple weeks when the 12 gauge comes out, the bottle release is coming up here at Pigskin. I think it's the third beer I've heard of in this town that's named after Cardale Jones. September 30th, that comes out. As you know, that packs a punch because Cardale's got a little bit of strength to it.
Ryan
knows everything about
Ryan's on Team Largs.
Noted beer drinker Ryan Ginn.
All right, let's
talk football.
Because like we said last week, we have a game to break down, and it was quite an interesting one, guys. I don't want to force J.K. Dobbins or J.T. Barrett or defense or anything into your mind, but Ryan, when you left Thursday night and went into work today, what were you still thinking? What was your biggest takeaway from 49-21 against Indiana?
That it was probably good for the cornerbacks to get tested the way they did with Baker Mayfield coming up. I think that's much more invaluable than, say, playing Tulsa or whoever. I just think it's a really big deal to know kind of what your weaknesses are and what you need to do. The Ohio State coaching staff is one of the best in the country. They have some of the best athletes in the country. And I think having tangible examples of what they did wrong first and then how they fixed it would be very critical with a big matchup ahead against a guy who can certainly throw it.
Yeah, 68 times Indiana threw it, Berm. I don't know. That Ohio State is probably not going to see another game plan quite like that. I think you have to give some credit to Indiana for Richard Lago, Simi Cobbs, those receivers were, they might not play a better game all year, and it still wasn't enough to even come close on the scoreboard in the end.
Yeah, I think that they're only throwing the ball that many times because Richard Lago was on fire in the first quarter and a half. I've personally, in 5 years of being on the field at Ohio State games, have never seen a quarterback throw the ball the way he did in that first quarter and a half on Thursday night. It was a absolute clinic that he was putting on, accuracy-wise, timing-wise. Everything was perfect. The first quarter, I think Indiana made like 8 catches in a row that were just acrobatic circus catches. They had a plan to go at Ohio State aggressive on the edges and throw the ball quickly, and they really executed it flawlessly in that first quarter and a half. But Ohio State's coaching staff is probably maybe the best in the country, and they get paid to make those adjustments. And what you saw was an Ohio State staff that changed things up in the second half, really got after Lago from the defensive line standpoint. And the beauty of this defensive line at Ohio State, you don't have to blitz linebackers to get pressure on the quarterback, and that's great for the Buckeyes because they're going to need that help in the back seven over the next few weeks, especially with Oklahoma coming in, who's really a team that exploits the tight end and Mark Andrews a lot. So it's a great first test for the Buckeyes, and I think the value of playing Indiana as opposed to a 77-3 game against Bowling Green a year ago is exponential, and it's almost difficult to explain how much better that is for the Buckeyes than to have played UTEP over the weekend.
Yeah, and I don't think, guys, when you look at the numbers, Indiana threw for 3 touchdowns. They threw for 400 yards. They did have to do it, as I said, 68 times to get to that total. I don't really look at it as a huge negative for Ohio State. People wringing their hands, this young secondary is not getting it done.
I think in most weeks, and I don't mean to cut you off, but if your opponent's throwing the ball 68 times, there's a reason for that, and it's a good thing. If you can make your opponent one-dimensional one way or the other, you're in good shape. and Indiana was one-dimensional, and Oklahoma will certainly try to establish the run with their big offensive line a little bit earlier and in a more aggressive way than Indiana was able to.
And I'm trying to think exactly, because I posed that question to Greg Schiano earlier today. I believe the stat he mentioned, I'd have to look back as I go to work later, I think 38 plays that Indiana ran that got 0 or negative yardage. So that's obviously including incomplete passes, but Indiana could not run the football. They had no choice but to try and throw it. And as Byrne mentioned, as Ginn jumped into right off the bat, at some point, the elite 4 or 5-star talented cornerbacks are going to make plays, and that defensive line, if you keep giving them chances to tee off on your quarterback, they are going to get home. So how will that affect Baker Mayfield? We'll see. I mean, he made some plays in that game a year ago. We can get into that later, but in some ways I feel like we've buried this lead long enough. Ryan, you're working on a story this week. Mike Weber is going to be able to play on Saturday against Oklahoma. Every indication. We watched him. We talked right before kickoff. He went through all the warm-ups, just wasn't quite ready to go on Thursday night. But this other guy, we heard all this hype about J.K. Dobbins, 205 total yards in his debut. I mean, what do you do now?
I think it's actually a really good situation for Ohio State if Weber is in fact fully healthy, because I would start Weber. I do think he's still the guy, and I think he doesn't get enough credit for what he did last year. But I would probably use them pretty close to evenly as complements for each other. I think if you can use each running back, something around 15 to 20 times, that would be just absolutely huge for them to be that fresh. They do similar but a little different things, and I think you can kind of change it up on Oklahoma a little bit. And I would actually probably use them a little differently than the way Oklahoma used Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon last year when they were on the field at the same time a lot. I just, have one in there, have the other one resting, and I think it'd be good for Ohio State to basically have, two guys who are that level, who you can pretty much use at least one of them all the time.
Don't forget to get those Facebook questions in. Berm, when you look at J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber now, to follow up on what Ginn is talking about here, I mean, we kind of thought this, or I did last week, that this could be a backfield by committee right from the start. Does this become more complicated for Ohio State because of what J.K. Dobbins did in his first career start?
I don't think it becomes more complicated. I think the truth is the truth. Right now you have two good running backs, and Mike Weber probably could have played against Indiana had he really been needed, but the Buckeyes know what they had in J.K. Dobbins and didn't feel the need to go out and press Mike into action. So I think Ryan's idea is right on. I think you try to go 15 carries apiece. You throw in 7 or 8 designed runs for J.T. Barrett, and then you mix in 25, 30 passes, and all of a sudden you've got a game plan that's a lot more difficult to figure out. Weber and J.K. are not that different style-wise, and so where you went last year, again, Perine and Mixon at Oklahoma, there's totally different backs, and you could play them at the field at the same time, but Ohio State's not going to change their offense. They're not going to bring in a 2-back set. They haven't run one in Urban Meyer's tenure, so I don't think that's coming. I think that it's a great problem, if you want to call it that, to have, because at Ohio State you want as many great running backs as possible to have the football in their hands, and it lessens the chance of Mikey getting hurt a little bit more or J.K. getting hurt. And it keeps them fresh. And I think you're going to want to really go tempo next weekend, which they didn't really do that much against Indiana, like really pushing it. And I think you'll see that rotation in and out like you did with the defensive line last week.
Yeah, it's as far as problems to have for Urban Meyer, I think that's a good one, because you're not talking about trying to get 2 quarterbacks on the field, which is a very smooth transition. Mary Smith had a question about J.T. Barrett and Berm. I was going to get to this with you anyway. As you guys know, the podcast have returned, and Berm, after the game on Friday, had a lot of thoughts. Also, in addition, if you go to our Ohio State forum, this week's question for our T-shirt giveaway, how many yards will J.T. Barrett throw for in the game against Oklahoma on Saturday night? So go to that Ohio State forum, sign up if you haven't, get your guesses there so we can get you some swag if you hit that number right on. But the question from Mary was, has J.T. Barrett improved at all? And you can answer this question any way you want, but I think it's important for you to clear your chest again.
We're on air, remember that.
Mary, I'm just going to come ask you personally. This is me talking to you. What do you want J.T. Barrett to improve on? Is it the ability to throw the ball with 5 defensive linemen in his face, the ability to throw the ball to receivers that aren't open, or the ability to win 27 out of his first 31 games and break every record in the Big Ten and at Ohio State. Because Peyton Manning isn't walking through that door at Ohio State. JT Barrett's the quarterback. He will continue to be the quarterback until he can no longer be the quarterback at Ohio State, and he's the best quarterback in Ohio State history, and he is going to set every single school record for the position. He's a game away from breaking the Big Ten's all-time touchdown record. Please, I beg you, Mary, and everyone else, just let him be. Let him be. The backups aren't better than JT Barrett, because if they were better than JT Barrett, they would be the starters, because that's how things work.
To get to some of what Mary's asking here, I mean, I think the emphasis was for JT Barrett to be more aggressive down the field. If there was something that if you asked him what he needed to get better at and what he feels like he's better at, Mary, that's where he's trying to change a little bit, to take more shots down the field. Now, however, you have to balance that with the fact that JT Barrett avoids turnovers. He makes the right decision. He doesn't force those throws that can sometimes get you into trouble.
I see people who get mad that he throws the ball out of bounds when no one's open, and I can't fathom what would make you think that that's a bad thing. Like, why would you be like, well, you know what, you should have thrown it into triple coverage, JT, because...
No, he is too conservative. He should throw the ball...
Listen,
he's got good receivers and he's a good quarterback.
I agree that they need to be willing to take shots. They did on Thursday. Paris dropped a 20-yard pass. Paris dropped a 50-yard pass. There's blame that goes around. The reality is they're going to continue to change the offense and get more aggressive and get more comfortable. We're talking about the first game of the season. He was 20 of 34 for 304 yards and 3 touchdowns. If that's a problem, then you are rooting for the wrong team.
I think that what's interesting is that today Thursday night fueled this fire.
Lord!
I'll give Berm just a second to cool down a little bit. So it's like he's got some hatch chilies going on. Tom Allen said they were going to drop 8 because, Ryan, they didn't think that JT Barrett was accurate enough to beat them. I think, this isn't the first time he's been accused of not being accurate enough. But the ball to Johnny Dixon early on, the touchdown that should have been to Paris Campbell, I don't know what more he could have done. If you add in those, I think 3 conservatively, maybe 4 drops in that game, the 24 for 35 for 350 or 60 looks a lot different, and that's not something that JT did wrong.
Yeah, overall, I think he showed he can be more accurate than he has been in the past 2 seasons, but I think it's fair of Indiana to note that he's dropped in each of the last 2 seasons, and 65 versus 60% is a big difference. And obviously, I think we're all having a different conversation here if Paris Campbell holds on to that pass, and that's very important to note. But he was something like 4 of 13 on passes that traveled 10 yards or more, and that does need to clean up a little bit. And again, it's not just JT Barrett's fault, and I think it's important to note that. But as an offense as a whole, if they complete 2 more of those passes a game, I think it'll be fine. But it's something that still needs to happen.
I agree. There just has to be a reasonable view at it, because yes, he's 4 of 13 for 10 yards downfield, but 3 of those are balls thrown out of bounds on purpose to avoid sacks. You have a drop by Paris Campbell, a drop by Johnny Dixon. All of a sudden now you're 7 of 10 downfield. So yeah, there's the missed ball to Marcus Ball in the end zone. That one he overshot him. Another ball to Marcus Ball that Marcus turned out and JT threw in. That's not necessary. I don't know whose fault that is, but all of a sudden you're talking a totally different thing. And if you just can't expect 10 of 10 from your quarterback, no quarterback in history is 10 of 10 on ball, downfield all game long. It's just not what they do.
I think it'll be fine once they actually do hit one. That's the biggest thing. And again, it's not his fault Paris Campbell dropped that one, but I'm just saying, we'd be having a different conversation right now, but he didn't and we're not.
They need to throw that ball down the field more to Ben Victor, because that's honestly when the offense changes, is when Victor's on the field and he gets that one-on-one coverage and they're able to take shots downfield. You see it every time Ben's on the field. On Thursday night it was a pass interference downfield, but you just got to take shots, and I think that's what Ryan Day and Kevin Wilson will continue to push. Does that mean that JT Barrett is currently bad? The answer is no, he's not. He is not worse. Your Buckeyes are better off when he's on the field than any other quarterback on the roster, because if it wasn't the case, he would not be on the field.
He's got Oklahoma's defense coming up on Saturday night. If you make your prediction in our Ohio State Land of 10 forum, go to Pigskin Volume 2. Tell us how many yards you think J.T. Barrett is going to throw for in that game. J.T. Barrett, not Dwayne Haskins, because I think that he'll be on the bench for that game. I only had one person, maybe I missed it, that suggested Haskins come in at halftime on Thursday night.
You don't see my Twitter feed, apparently. I must follow the worst people on Twitter because I saw 6 or 7 in a row for sure that were very like, well, this I saw someone said this team will never win until J.T. Barrett isn't the quarterback.
They've won a few games, haven't they?
That's the rumor.
We got one more question on here from Joshua Shannon about whether Ohio State needs to stick with rushing 4 to try and contain Baker Mayfield, how that might help the corners, because they had an up and down performance. We talked about it. If rushing 4 is going to be the key in this game, it sounds like Ryan's got the first answer for it.
I think you do a little bit of both. You mix it in. I think there are times where they can get home with 3 or 4. I believe Jayshon Cornell's strip sack was one where they only rushed 3, which is pretty incredible to see. So there are times where this defensive line can really pressure the quarterback and make them throw within 3 seconds if they're just rushing 4. But I do think you want to mix things in and let guys like Jerome Baker or even one of the cornerbacks or safeties take a shot every now and then because they have the athletes to be able to do that kind of stuff. I do think the secondary will be improved enough to where they will be able to pick and choose their battles, but I do think it is a gift that there are times in this game where they will be able to do that and still contain them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's probably not another team in the country that is as prepared to defend Baker Mayfield as Ohio State. Berm, when you talk about Sam Hubbard, who is dropping back into coverage and playing some linebacker, we saw maybe a taste of that 5 defensive line package, the super rushman. I don't know if it has a name yet, but
now it does.
When you have Sam Hubbard who can run with that speed as a former defensive back / lacrosse player / amazing dodgeball player, when you have pterodactyl arms like Jalen Holmes, when you have the relentless energy of Tyquan Lewis, when you have Draymond Jones coming from the interior, I mean, I could go. I didn't even mention Nick Bosa yet. There's no team, I don't think, that has the tools to stop Baker Mayfield and what he does well. And I think what's interesting is that you have to pick 4 from this group because we saw some people on the field on Thursday night at Indiana that haven't really factored for Ohio State. I'm thinking of Jayshon Cornell. I'm thinking of a freshman in Chase Young. Who else got in the mix? I mean,
Jonathan Cooper. He chased down Richard Lego from behind.
And he recovered the fumble on Cornell.
Since we're out here in Gahanna, I don't know how that one dropped to number 3rd on our list. But am I wrong about this, Berm? Does anybody have the tools necessary?
No, I think that from a perimeter speed standpoint, there's no team in the country defensively that does what Ohio State does, and you saw it with Chase Young playing linebacker on Thursday night. Sam Hubbard, those guys can line up out there. Don't need to put their hand in the ground. Tyquan Lewis did it. Jalen Holmes did it. I think the real thing here, what's being asked, is if they need to rush 4. Oklahoma's offensive line is one of the 3 or 4 best in the country, and they're going to need to come up with some wrinkles on Saturday to get to Baker Mayfield. So whether it's occasionally bringing in Jerome Baker, Dante Booker, Chris Worley, who I think Worley played a phenomenal game on Thursday, and honestly, it's hard because Raekwon McMillan was so good for 3 years at Ohio State. I think Worley brings things to the field that Raekwon didn't. He's a little bit better sideline to sideline, so I think he's even better in that contain role for a guy like Baker Mayfield. I agree. There's not a better defense in the country as far as how to prepare for a guy like Baker Mayfield in Ohio State because they're able to churn so many guys in and out. And we saw it last year in Norman. He was never able to really shake them on the edge. And I think that without D.D. Westbrook as the real long threat for Oklahoma this year, without P. Ryan and Mixon out of the backfield as the potential outlet, Mixon killed Ohio State last year, and I don't know why they didn't use him more often because every time they brought in P. Ryan, it was like a free play for the Buckeye defense. So I feel like this year you're going to be required, if you're Oklahoma, to rely more on Baker Mayfield than they did a year ago, and I think that's really good news for Ohio State.
A couple really good questions. We appreciate those for our Facebook Lives here at Pigskin Brewing in Gahanna. So I'll come up with the last one here. It's, the show is winding down. It's a staple. So I'll start with you, Ryan. Are we going to see a replay of what happened last year in Norman on Saturday night, or do you have the Sooners coming into the shoe and pulling a surprise?
I'd say it's probably a little bit in between that. I think last year was a bit of a crazy game where Ohio State's defense was just playing absolutely out of their minds, and a guy like Noah Brown catches 4 touchdowns. So I don't know if I anticipate them winning by that margin again, but I do think Ohio State is the better team. Vegas clearly believes that. They opened as a 9-point favorite, which I know some people thought it was too high, but top to bottom roster, I think Ohio State's probably at least a touchdown better than Oklahoma. You look at kind of like Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State right now in terms of roster construction, and who's at the absolute top. So when you look at just pure talent, it's a home game for Ohio State. They got tested last week, and cornerbacks can see what they need to work on, and I think they did show improvement as the game went on. I would say I'm looking at Ohio State somewhere in the neighborhood of a 10-point win.
Okay. Berm, you got them by 10? Got a replay of last year? Where are you at?
As I kind of alluded to, I don't know why anyone thinks Oklahoma's going to be better this year than they were a year ago when they had the Biletnikoff Award winner. They had 2 very good running backs in Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon. They had the same offensive line. They have the home field advantage a year ago. There's all the reasons in the world. Last year with the youngest Ohio State team in history going into Norman in week 2, that Oklahoma should have been a better matchup a year ago. This year, with Lincoln Riley in his second game as head coach, with Ohio State have already seen Baker Mayfield before. They know what he can do. Again, you lack the deep threat of D.D. Westbrook, and you lack the home run hitting threat of Joe Mixon. I don't know why Oklahoma should be better this year, and I know Ohio State lost 3 first-round picks in the secondary, and that's going to take some time to adjust, but I see a 38-17 Buckeye win somewhere in that ballpark. I don't know why. And maybe I'm completely off base. Maybe I didn't watch enough of Oklahoma against UTEP. I just don't see them better. I don't see them gaining points on Ohio State from a year ago at Ohio Stadium with everything else that the Buckeyes bring back, and they lost.
I mean, I think the argument would be that they didn't play up to their potential last year, and that they were better at the end of the season with those guys than they were.
But now those guys are gone.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's basically like the same thing now. It wasn't like they're necessarily worse. And you did mention they didn't use Joe Mixon the way they should have. I think they played a really bad game. And there's also the potential that Ohio State could play a worse game this year than they did last year.
I'm going to trust Urban Meyer over Lincoln Riley. That's basically what it comes down to.
10-point win. I'm just saying.
Ryan, you guys saw it first. Ryan Ginn thinks Ohio State loses to Purdue in the Big Ten championship game.
28-point win against.
Hey, I said 21.
Speaking of Purdue, it's our weekly state.
38-17.
We have to keep tabs on Berm's pick to win the West. Looked pretty good, actually.
Jeff Brom knows what he's doing. That guy's a good coach. They may not win a Big Ten game this year, but do they?
Well, that's quite.
Do they play Rutgers?
I don't know Purdue's schedule. If I'm being
honest. Purdue gets 1 win if they play Rutgers. If not, they don't.
I didn't come prepared for that Purdue question. I'm sorry.
Sorry, everyone.
That's my bad. I'm thinking somewhere around the ballpark of like 45-24, something like that, just off the top of my head.
21 points. 21 points, same as mine.
I think Ohio State has the better coaching staff. I think they have more veteran players. They came off of a test. I don't know. I'm sort of this mindset now where you do have this argument with what happened to Florida State, that you need to play challenging games right off the bat. I think this is a better schedule for Ohio State to start on the road with Indiana and then get Oklahoma and then take a couple weeks to maybe play more freshmen, which they already did a lot, by the way, last week. I think the personnel is better. I think the coaching staff is better. And I think that the horseshoe is a home field advantage that you do not want to mess with. So, I mean, maybe I'm wrong on the score. That just, for some reason, when I think Ohio State, Oklahoma, that's what popped into my mind.
Right, to me, that's because that's what the score was last year.
What?
But here's the thing. Is anything so different between those two schools, and then you take in the points that you get from playing at home, that Oklahoma would be a better matchup this year than a year ago? And I just don't think so. It's not to say that Oklahoma's a bad team. It's that Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, Michigan, I hate to say it, there is 5 or 6 teams in college football that are just better than everyone else, and Ohio State is one of those teams. And Oklahoma's on the next tier, and I do believe that there's a 3-touchdown gap between those tiers.
One thing I think all three of us can agree on is that it's a lot more fun to see these matchups like Oklahoma and Ohio State. No offense for what's coming the next couple weeks for Ohio State's schedule, but it's just way more fun to see these big-time conference teams, these traditional powerhouses match up. So one way or the other, no matter what happens, I'm ready for Saturday night already.
Don't let anyone ever forget to remind you that Ryan is from SEC country and that he was born and raised in Louisiana and that he doesn't believe in Northern football. Deny it, Ryan.
I deny that.
You guys, you saw it here first. He's
Tough.
lying through his teeth.
Tough show for Ryan.
Lion Ryan. You saw it here.
I cannot wait for next week's show. Oh, God. It's going to end with me making an on-air apology to everyone involved.
Well, stay tuned for that. Good luck to everybody. Get those guesses in on the Ohio State Forum at Land of 10 for how many passing yards for JT Barrett this week. It's going to be a fun week. College game day is coming. Somehow it's the 4th straight game that Ohio State will have that ESPN crew in town. I think that's probably a record that might stand for a while. We're going to be there bright and early. We're going to have all the coverage you could possibly need today, every day up to Saturday, and then well after the game ends on Saturday night. So stay tuned with us. Thanks for joining. Thanks for the questions. We'll see you next week. Come join us at Pigskin Brewing.
Have a good week, everyone.
See you.